Hello, good afternoon. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Test Automation, and we focus on test automation, software test automation. We've done that for a bunch of years. The last 4 or 5 years, we've worked with between 30 and 40 different companies in the United States and Canada. Today, I'm excited to have Thomas Haver on the webinars to give a talk entitled The Automation Firehose, Be Strategic and Tactical. And he's going to get into a lot of different aspects of test automation for us. Thomas and I met, I think, a year or two ago. He's on the testing talks, the testing conference circuit nationwide and internationally, I believe. He came down for TISCA, which was awesome, by the way, and I'll be happy to share a little bit more about that with you soon. But got to see him then. His Twitter handle is here, Cogs Fun. So there at the bottom, COGS Fun. And so look, a little bit about Beaufort Fairmont. We're based in Cary, North Carolina. We're a small business. We appreciate all the business that we have and all the clients that we have. We help our clients with several things. One is, how do you sync up testing and dev in agile environments? Another is, how do we automate regression tests? And finally, what part does testing play in continuous integration, continuous delivery, DevOps, and continuous testing? How do we interact in those situations? We help through consulting, through training, and also through having dedicated experts. If you need people to help you on your project, give us a yell. We've been working remotely for a bunch of years with our clients. We're very good at it. We've known this for a lot of time, how to do this. We've learned a lot of tricks over the years, and we're happy to help your company with that as well. So give us a yell. Once again, my name is Paul Merrill. Happy to have you with us. If you're new, this is called the B list, and I like to say thank you to some folks that have been around the last few weeks or whatever, the last month, I guess, since we did this last. The B list is here specifically for me to be able to say thank you to folks who have helped Beaufort Fairmont, to folks who have helped me personally in some way, shape, or form, and here are just a few of those folks that made it this time around. I want to call your attention to a couple things. We always need people for our clients. We have a robot framework coaching role that has come up. We're looking for someone for 3 to 5 years of automation experience. Robot framework, absolutely key. So if you know robot framework, you're willing to travel about 50% of the time. This is a 3-month contract, and it's a really great company. This client is really strong. They are a very mature group in terms of their organization, in terms of their structure, very sound leadership, both technically and at the organizational levels and managerial aspects as well. Love working with these folks. Can't wait to find the right person to jump in and help out on this project. The next one is a Tosca engineer. So we need someone who is an automation engineer with experience in Tosca. If you are that person, you also have data testing experience, you're willing to work on testing in the UI and automation, we would like to talk to you. So reach out to me personally or through the website. You'll find this job on the website as well at beaufortfairmont.com/automation engineer. I wanted to bring something else to your attention. So this week, or last week, I guess, I wrote down some notes. I've been working from my home office mostly for the last 8 years. We work with clients on client sites from time to time. We've had offices here and there when we needed them. But most of the time I have worked from my home office, and I'm very fortunate to have a home office. But during that time, I've learned some tips, and I wanted to share them with folks because I know that this is different for many of you working from home during the current issues with the coronavirus. And so these are my 12 pro tips to working remotely. It's on LinkedIn. If you just go look for LinkedIn, you can find it. Look for me on LinkedIn. You'll see it as the first or the latest article that I put out there. And there's a barcode here for it too, if you'd like to scan and just go directly to that. And the link is down at the bottom. So make sure to take a look at that if working from home is new to you, or if you just feel like you need a few tips. One of the things I haven't figured out yet is how to keep it quiet when everyone's home. So both my wife and I are working from home these days, and we don't have childcare like many of you. We don't have schooling going on right now. So how in the world do you keep it quiet? I don't know how that works. We haven't quite figured it out yet. So if you hear a knock at my door and people run in and they're about this tall, hey, look, we're all doing it right now. We're all trying to get through it. That's just what's going on, okay? So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your patience today as well. You all know, if you're not new to this, that we do a $50 Amazon gift card giveaway every single month. And you might be the one to win if you stick around today. So make sure to stick around, because $50 on Amazon is nothing to shake a stick at when you need a new movie to watch every day, every evening. So make sure to stick around to the end and get a chance to win that gift card. So we've already got some really nice comments here I see in the questions. It says, good luck, Thomas, and some of those other things. What I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Thomas now. So Thomas is a friend of mine. He's one of the smartest people I know. He started out, I believe, in biology, and hopefully he'll give us a little bit of his background as he gets started here as well. But I'm going to bring Thomas off of mute. And Thomas, welcome.
Hey, welcome, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about this. I'm looking forward to your presentation. The automation Firehose, be strategic and tactical. While we're getting switched over here, can you tell me a little bit about your experience? I know that you started out, was it in biology?
That was at the end. So it was physics, and then biophysics to finish things off.
Wow, that is awesome. So big brain on Thomas. Make sure to use it for everything it's worth. Thomas, you should have control now and be able to share your screen.
Yep. So
Okay.
can everyone see my screen?
I've lost the screen here. Let's see. Yeah, I think so. I think it's just on a different, there it is. And let me get off the screen. Thank you so much. And let me know when you need me, and we'll do questions at the end. Make sure to type them out as we go. And I want to say one more thing before Thomas gets going here. I know that this is a tough time for so many folks. And one of the things that I think we can all do to help out, just a little thing, is to be positive. So let's try to be positive when we see people, smile at people. You never know who it might be helping, and keep that up. I know Thomas is one of the most positive people I know, and this is a fun presentation. I'm looking forward to seeing it. So thank you very much, and good luck, Thomas.
Hey, thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. So as Paul mentioned, I imagine in the past week or so, most of us have become very acquainted with our coworkers' pets, small children, significant others, delivery drivers. So I'm doing the same thing as Paul. So I'm giving this webinar from home. So if you hear some background noise, just let Paul know in the chat. He's going to MC it and he'll interrupt. So that way, if you miss a certain point, I can go over it. During the points in this presentation, I'll pause also for audience to ask questions. I like to do interactive talks. So you will have an opportunity throughout the presentation, not just at the end, to go through. So a little bit about what we're going to do today. When I say the automation fire hose, what I'm talking about is ways in which we can approach automation from a team level or an enterprise level, and the aspects for an enterprise program that comes from selecting a framework and tools, how do we integrate this into our life cycle, the common challenges that are faced by people implementing automation, the metrics and standards that you have to bring to above to the management, as well as common approaches that you should take. So first, a little bit about myself. My name is Thomas Haver. So I am an application architect. Also, as Paul mentioned, an international speaker. You'll see me a lot at conferences and professional groups. If you want to contact me, my Twitter handle is @cogsfun. Also, just launched today for everyone is a brand new blog, Red Green Refactor. Since we're all working remote, we're itching for ways to interact with each other and share knowledge. And one of those ways we're going to do is using Red Green Refactor. As Paul mentioned, also, I started off, I was a scientist for around a decade. Collecting various pieces of paper that said I graduated, and also accruing a massive amount of debt before jumping into IT. I'm also a huge board gamer. I own around 2,000 board games. If we switch over to the webcam view eventually, I'll show you a wall of board games behind me. And also I'm an evangelist for Ruby Cucumber automation. So it's not the best one, it's just one that is very popular in the Central Ohio region, and something that I personally am a fan of. And as Paul mentioned with his wife and kids, I also have a lovely wife and 2 kids. So they put up with my huge board game collection and at times destroy it. So a little bit of background about automation. Let's, sort of level set for us so we establish a shared understanding. When we talk about strategy and tactics, what we mean by strategy is it's a plan of action or policy designed to achieve a major or overall aim, whereas tactics is us actually implementing our available means to accomplish that overall goal. So for instance, Star-Lord, he had a great strategy for defeating Thanos in Infinity War, but it was his own emotional tactics that ended up costing the Avengers, allowing Thanos to snap half the universe. The challenges that we face with automation are not brand new. A lot of the examples that I'm going to give you are decades old. And for instance, this one taken from Microsoft's now defunct blog on testing from 2004. They had a huge challenge. Their challenge when they wanted to test IE was the number of combinations of IE versus those operating systems. It doesn't matter if you have the resources of Microsoft to test against these number of combinations, against say 26 language binaries for each one of those operating systems or versions of IE, make it near impossible to actually test Internet Explorer, which I think most of us here on the webinar will agree with is the worst browser of all time. So how did Microsoft actually approach this? Well, one of the ways in which they solved this problem is something very similar to us now, which is persona-based testing. So what they ended up doing was identifying various buckets, technology stacks that they could look at, customer profiles that they could generate, and they came up with a subset of test cases that they could use for each one of these sort of combinations. So they don't have to test every single combination, they only tested what are the most valuable. So that is a theme that we're going to carry throughout, of testing only things that are actually valuable. The promise for test automation has always been that it's going to save time and lower costs while raising quality. Many of you who are in the automation space have likely been asked by upper management, great, when we introduce automation, how many people can we cut? I've been asked that numerous times. Implementing test automation is not about cutting people. It's about adding that tool into your tool belt so you're more effective at your job, so that you can do more value-added tasks that are not something as a target for automation. So it's not something where you sprinkle magic fairy dust of automation on an enterprise and suddenly they're all better. What we need to do is come up with a way to effectively introduce this automation. So this is one of those points in time in which I told Paul that I'm soliciting some audience feedback. So I wanted an opportunity for everyone listening in today to provide me some of the challenges that they have faced at their workplace or prior workplace with maintaining or implementing automation. So Paul, let me know if we have any takers.
Yeah, so sometimes this takes a little bit of time for people to step up and be ready. Can you ask again what it was you were interested in, just so that I hear it again?
Sure. So
missed it.
To give everyone the opportunity, I was wondering if people would provide me with some stories about the challenges they faced with either maintaining automation at their workplace or implementing automation for the first time.
Perfect, perfect. So there are a couple of them here. So Anita says a steep learning curve. And then we have another challenge here from Tony. And Tony says, enough resources to maintain and build our test automation capability. And then I'm not sure if this is the same Anita, this might be a different one. Introducing testing mindset. Here's Austin. Austin, we're getting a bunch of them now. So Austin says, we're just now building our first automation and we're still figuring out how to prioritize. You want a few more?
No, that's a good set. So many of those areas we're actually going to also cover within the presentation. We often are given sort of like either a brownfield where we come in and there's been some existing automation built up over years and we have to either work in that brownfield or throw it away and try to replace it. Alternatively, sometimes we have that golden opportunity of working in a greenfield where they got nothing in place. The challenge with that greenfield is, of course, the skill set of the people there. When I originally went into Huntington National Bank, which was my prior employer, I was challenged with instituting automation and training all of the existing people. They didn't want to cut all these people. Instead, what they wanted to do was take manual testers and turn them into automation developers, but without risking any delivery schedules. That sounds like almost an impossibility. I'll show you here some of the steps you can take to actually deliver on that. So when we talk about the overall goal, this is again level setting for automation. We know that as an application grows in size, that it becomes more costly to actually test that application, and our coverage drops over time. And that promise is, hey, after a certain point of time, if we've introduced that automation, sprinkled that magic fairy dust over it, then that automation will help us increase the quality and test coverage, and it will reduce the time to actually test it. But we see that when we introduce automation, at a certain point, it actually takes about as much time for maintenance as it does for the development code. And you're spending most of your time maintaining that and having it run at a semi-passable rate rather than something that actually saves that time. So this is something that's taken from Alfredi Dust in a book that was published, I think, back in 2002. So what do we actually want to do? If we want to do automation right, there are these facets that I look for delivering automation when we talk about an overall strategy. Like, what is the scope? Knowing what we're actually going to set out to focus on from an application perspective, from a testing scope perspective. What are the objectives of the program? Something that is measurable. What is the approach for us to actually get from point A to point B? The framework and tools is a big component for what we select. That will limit us no matter what tool we select, whether it's commercial or it's open source. What environment do we have to go into and work at? Is this a company that delivers fast, as in they've got a CI/CD pipeline that delivers multiple times per day? Or is this a slow company that only delivers, say, quarterly? Schedule, how can you actually fit automation into that SDLC and get it to run on a good schedule? And lastly, and I think most importantly, the technical skill set of the people in place. They need to have the ability to actually deliver that automation for you to even get something out of it. So let's start first with approach. I try to arm my testers in whatever organization I'm at with a sort of checklist similar to this that's going to ask them the question, what should we automate? This is not going to be a strict sort of checklist for them to go whenever they're in a tasking session or they're going in to requirements phase if they're in a waterfall. It's more of a helpful guideline for them, because one of the issues that you face is you go to any two people and you ask them like, hey, should we automate this or can we automate this? And you'll likely get two different responses. So the area in which you want to try to address is to synchronize all of the people across all the teams or within a single team into what they think should be automated according to a given set of criteria. And so here are some just sample criteria that I use. I pass out a checklist to my teams, but I don't absolutely require them to use it for a given session. Instead, it's helpful as a guideline. So asking questions about, are we actually going to save time by doing this? Is this something that's repeatable? Is this something that's in the critical path? Is this something that's prone to a lot of human error? These are the questions that we want to ask when we're going through and trying to implement new features. Another area that's often overlooked, and I know a lot of folks like Paul talk about the costs of automation. So what are the costs? Well, our test scripts, when we write them, have to be maintained. So it should be treated the same as our development code. You have additional costs for us in maintaining them, updating them, or removing them as application functionality is removed. There are a lot of basic costs you should consider, such as the tooling that you have, operating system upgrades, language upgrades, as well as things like documentation around your implementation, as well as onboarding. So it's not just simple, you grab an open source tool and use it. You have to consider the automation cost and your overall cost of test automation. You have additional organizational constraints. So when we introduce automation, the expectation is that we're not going to change our delivery timelines. So if, say, you're working in a sprint, they're going to expect everything to be done at the end of the sprint. But as is often the case, dev bleeds into QA time. And we have less time for QA to work, which means that it's possible that you don't get those automation scripts done on time to even execute. So what do we want to consider? Well, we're always going to be limited by the schedule, also by budget, and the technical skill set of the people within the organization. Therefore, we have to take that risk-based approach to automation. Work on the frequency of use. criticality, legal risk. Those most important automation scripts are the ones we start with. We want to also look for a lot of complex manual scenarios that require a lot of data or environment setup, especially outside of your active team or that go across teams if you're working at an enterprise level. These are the so-called delivery pain points that you have to upfront address and would have to recurring address that every time you wanted to run regression. If you can automate those, you save a lot of time. Again, I can use a checklist here. So this is an example that's broken down by features where we want to make the call up front. What are the most important features that we should actually automate? You can use any set number of criteria that are important to your org. I don't use one that's a generic one that applies to every org because it matters specifically. Is something on the critical path or frequently run? Do you have legal compliance, such as American with Disabilities Association compliance? Do you have a lot of data and environmental concerns? Is this something that's good for reuse? If you provide a rating, whether it's simple check boxes I have here, or maybe on a scale of 1 to 10 for each one of these areas, then you can actually generate a score. This is an automation scorecard, if you will, that will determine what are the most important features or scripts that you should automate first. So if you're given that limited time and budget to do it, you're going to be working from top down at the most important features first, the least important features. And as a benefit, if you're cut off at a certain point, you at least know, for the sake of technical debt, for features that you should have automated but you missed. So that way you can identify it and come back and address it, or at least call it out in your organization that we are missing coverage here because this should have met our criteria for automation and it did not. So this brings to a larger point when we talk about risk-based approach. So as I said, oftentimes organizations look for a way to cut people after they've introduced automation, and that's not the purpose of automation. So it's important from a cultural perspective throughout your entire organization to know that good test automation is there to help enhance testing instead of replacing it. It's going to help testers do their job instead of replacing them. That's why you have a lot of folks that will say these are automated checks and not automated tests, because testing is a lot more involved activity than executing a script. Our good test automation should be part of the life cycle, as in part of that definition of ready and done, if say you're practicing a form of Scrum, or part of your entry or exit criteria if you're waterfall. That automation should also be focused and informative, as in it should be there and available, not just for you, but for the stakeholders on the team, and it should be trustworthy. If you run scripts daily and half of your scripts fail, eventually all those stakeholders are going to stop reviewing your scripts. So it's important that it reaches a trustworthy level. It's better to exclude scripts and address it on your own than have a script that is flaky and will pass and fail and pass and fail, go to your stakeholders, so that way they lose trust in it, and therefore you're not having people actually review the automation itself. From a perspective of framework and tools, it's an important upfront discussion to have. Some of you are sort of stuck with a legacy system, as in you came into the org and this is what they're using and you're just going to have to go with it. It's important to keep up to date with the latest tools in the industry. And it's important as an upfront, if you're going to implement for a given team or an organization, to choose the right tool for the job. So I'm going to give an example here. This is just an example. This is not the best. This is one of the ways in which you can implement automation. So my preference is to use Gherkin. And the Gherkin that's shown here is very low level, as it's imperative level. Gherkin itself is not your test. It's a collaboration tool for the team. So if you're going to use something like Ruby Cucumber with Selenium for testing web applications, you only want to use Gherkin if you're going to use it as a collaboration tool. If you're using it purely as tests and the only people who are viewing it are the testers, don't add this extra abstraction layer on top. Instead, just go right to the scripts themselves. So it's important that you choose the right tool for the job. So if you're choosing something like this and no one's actually looking at the Gherkin itself, then you've just wasted time. So it's about choosing for the right level for the job. When choosing between, say, open source and commercial tools, you have to make that consideration for how does it align with your tech stack. The farther I go into my career in automation, the more I come to the conclusion that as much as possible, if we can have our automated scripts, be that for desktop, mobile, web, mainframe, services, if you can align the programming language in which you're writing your test automation with the programming language of the development code base, then you'll actually make your job easier. One, by reducing the tech stack size, but two, by engaging and having our developers work alongside of our testers. We want to polyskill. We want people to have access and be as readable as possible, so that way testing can provide those confidence values. So try to align your automation tooling with your tech stack. So the example I give here is Selenium. So Selenium has been implemented in many different languages. So if you're working on a standard web app, try to choose the language that matches up with the development language of your choice. In this way, you'll try to bias yourself for greater success. There's also some questions with regarding standards. So people often start with, say, these very low-level tests that are one-offs and are in the imperative style. What's important is, though, underneath the covers is that you want to minimize the amount of new code that you actually have to write. You need to have things be reusable as much as possible, even if you're building with these so-called Lego blocks of code itself. So for instance, that I show here, I give in Ruby very quick, hey, the user clicks the insert name of element here. So this is a step that could be reused again and again for any element that you want to click on. So great for a first start. However, there's some problems with this. Again, if you're trying to go with that collaboration level at Gherkin, you want to work on the declarative level. So describe what the user is accomplishing rather than those UI-driven steps. That's a so-called anti-pattern. I love to provide bad examples for you, so you get to see, hey, I make those mistakes as well. But now what we use these for are ways for people to learn, because it's the easiest way for people to learn and build. So we start with those little imperative steps, especially if you're working with people who have never coded before in their life. You try to keep it as simple as possible. So you're making a trade-off. So one good practice for one bad practice, in the hopes of just adopting all bad practices in the future as with a roadmap to that. So this is using those little imperative steps that can eventually become those declarative steps. What else do we need to be concerned about? Well, whether you're testers or developers or business analysts listening in today, it's important to recognize that those UI-driven automation are some of the slowest automation steps that you can run. They are important. They provide business value because they're trying to mimic how the user is interacting with the system. However, they're not the end-all, be-all. Integration testing is important. So you need to focus on API testing, testing with the interfaces or modules, making sure that you have something that is more robust and provides a faster feedback loop than does our UI-based automation. If you have that ability, great, do it. If not, then you need to pair with the development team or an architect to make sure that this is an upfront concern for any new feature that you're developing. If we take this to its logical conclusion, unit testing is also very important because it is the fastest method of testing, it's easier to debug, highly reusable, and it's the lowest cost to actually fix. So this is something that we can have owned by our developers or by our testers, but ultimately the team is responsible for quality. Something that provides this fast feedback loop is very valuable. So as an upfront, unit testing should be your top priority, followed by integration testing, followed by those UI tests, and then lastly, your end-to-end scenarios. But saying, hey, you should do this and you should do that is nice and easy for me. We often encounter a lot of challenges associated with test automation. And I will admit, as I go through here, I have broken every single one of these rules that I'm showing you. So I'm just as guilty as everyone else. I've just managed to learn a little bit from it. So I'm trying to share some of that with you today. So first and foremost, based upon the name of the presentation, we say, what is the automation fire hose? Well, the automation fire hose is us trying to automate everything just because we can. Everything looks like a nail if you're a hammer. Just because you can automate something doesn't mean that you should. Instead, you should adapt that risk-based approach to automation, only automating the most valuable scenarios first and foremost, and working your way down that list to the less valuable scenarios if you have time, if you have budget to do so. You want to make sure that your scenarios are high value and are respectable. Respectable tests that pass frequently, that build confidence by your stakeholders. Another issue is data failure. You write your automation scripts, and it's great. They work in a single environment. That's a bad automated test. As an upfront concern, you want to have your automation scenarios run across multiple environments, including potentially prod. This should be a ready state criteria or an entry criteria for you writing automation. You want to make sure as an upfront that you have full access to your data, so that way your automated tests can run across multiple environments. That adds additional value to your automation tests. The aforementioned flickering tests or flaky tests. So you have a test, it passes, you run it again, fails, runs it again, pass, run it again, fail, on, off, red, green, red, green. That hurts from a perspective of your stakeholders stop believing in your automation scenarios, and your own team members stop having trust in those automation scenarios. So what my advice is to you is, if you have flickering tests, yank them out of the execution. That is your automation technical debt. You need to either fix those scenarios or just remove them entirely. Now, why are those tests flickering? It could be because you lack control of data, or the environment is unstable, or occasionally we do write tests that don't meet our own coding standards, and it's because of that. But either way, you need to address and tackle flickering tests actively. Another area where I commonly see issues are extremely long tests. Tests that will validate hundreds of things in the course, or gherkin scenarios that are 300 lines long that will also validate many things. At a certain point in time, as the reader, if you're looking through the code, your eyes glaze over and you forget what the point of those tests are. So you can bet that if you're a business stakeholder, a product owner, or just a business partner reading those scenarios, that they're going to give up as well. You have an additional problem. If you validate a number of items and your test quits at the first failure point, then you potentially miss out on those dozen or up to 100 other validations that you were going to execute in the course of that extremely long test. And you have no idea whether they're passing or failing, whether there's an active defect or not. So you need to try to take the same approach to a lot of your, say, UI-driven tests that are done with integration or unit tests, that ideally each test focuses on one thing, no more, no less. So it's important that you use that priority for unit and integration tests over UI, as well as that UI should be automated as needed to verify and focus on end user behavior. So one goal for that end user, whether that's just simply logging into your application or successfully checking out with a product. Another common issue is that shaky foundation. So you build your automation suite and keep on working on it to get you to the next day. Hey, you know, I had to put in a bunch of spaghetti code, but we got done. Time to work on the next sprint or the next feature. If you keep on doing that, your automation code base will have tremendous maintenance costs. It will be so large and have such a shaky foundation that eventually you're going to throw it away. I've worked at a company where every few years they would build up and then throw away their automation framework. And that is because they had no standards in place. They had no general architecture guidelines. Every team was off on their own doing their own thing. It made it very difficult to automate across teams and leverage automation scripts for end-to-end flows. It also made it difficult to onboard new people when they're looking through a mess of code. What you want to do as an upfront is treat the automation code the same way you would want good development code to be treated. So follow those good practices, like don't repeat yourself. Keep it simple, stupid. Have scheduled code reviews be part of your process. use code analysis tools, or those like linters, and schedule regular refactoring sessions, ways in which you can help guarantee the quality of your code is held to the same standard as you would expect the application under test. We often encounter an issue of our automation lagging behind development. So we're told, hey, dev went far into QA just because we ran into some problems and we didn't get our estimations right. So we're just gonna have to skip on the automation this time. Can you validate it really quick manually? So that is the bad approach, because we're just gonna be accruing more technical debt. In this case, it's automation technical debt. What you need to do up front is incorporate automation feasibility into the definition of ready, and completed scripts into the definition of done. And barring you being able to complete those automation scripts, in agreement that you identify and call out that technical debt every time you have to miss out on a script that you should have automated. So that way the team has something that they can tackle and take on for the next release, the next sprint. You at least want to make that work visible. I realize it is impossible to get all of your stakeholders to agree that, hey, we're not going to push this production unless, say, the automated scripts are written. Corners are often cut for the purposes of delivering on that business value. But it's important to call that out and be a champion for quality within your team. So how do we schedule our automation effectively? How do we make sure it's part of our life cycle? Well, there are a few approaches that you can take. One of those approaches that I recommend is example mapping, which was originally developed by Matt Wynn, he of Cucumber fame. The components of example mapping are the same that we talk about in behavior-driven development. We try to discover that user behavior. We formulate our approach in terms of the user's interaction with the system. And ideally, we automate those user interactions. How does this actually apply to automation? Well, here's how. So in an example mapping session, core members of the team, sometimes they were called three amigos, your product owner, business analyst, developer, and now tester, included in that meeting, focus on a single user story. For that user story, you're going to identify the business rules. Those are written down in blue cards. For each business rule, you're going to come up with one or more examples that illustrate the user's behavior. In the course of that example mapping session, if you have any questions that cannot be answered by the people in the room, you capture those on those red question cards. At the end of the session, you should see something built out similar to this. And you should have the ability at the end of the session for the teams to all give a thumbs up, we're ready to go, or a thumbs down, no, this story needs some additional work before we can actually proceed. So where's the value for automation? Well, for those blue business rules, those are a good idea of the business logic that needs to be implemented. So something on the order of unit and integration tests. Those green example cards, those are good targets for us to write those potential UI-driven steps into automation of how the user is going to interact with the system to verify those business rules. So in this way, we try to make automation an upfront concern for the team and ensure that at least we have coverage according to the business. So why is this valuable? The examples become our user scenarios. We establish a shared understanding in the team of what the scope of a given story is. Those business rules can become those sort of acceptance criteria. And we end up reducing work, especially of large or unclear stories. The color coding is not by mistake. The color coding is for a very good reason. In conducting an example mapping session, if you have way too many red cards, that is an indication that development work is not ready to begin. Everyone should give a nice thumbs down for that. If you have too many blue business rules for a given user story, that's a good indication that that user story is way too dense. And you need to split it apart into 2 or more user stories. If you have way too many examples for a given business rule, that is a good indication that that business rule is too dense and you need to break it apart into 2 or more business rules. So this helps break things down into its component parts, help the entire team understand what the scope of the story is, where we need to put our unit integration and functional UI tests. So what else can we do when we're talking about integrating it for a team? How do we maintain on a day-over-day basis the standards that we expect for automation? Well, one of those approaches is with a regression review. So this can be done on a regular basis. What I recommend for teams that deliver infrequently is, say, every quarter. For teams that deliver more frequently, you do it within, say, that month or 2-week period of a sprint. And in a regression review, you have that test lead for that application under test. They are going to compile a list of all the new release scripts and regression scripts. It should be very easy, regardless of project tracking tool that we have, whether those are automation scripts you pull from the IDE, or you're pulling them off of a project tracking tool like Azure DevOps or QC ALM or QA Complete. That test lead is going to work with your production support because you want to test the most valuable things. So what is valuable? Well, any incidents that you had in production that caused trouble with your customers are certainly worthy of additional test coverage. What else? Well, the business, they're the ones that are actually paying for this application, and they're the ones that should be tracking what our users are doing. We want to find out how they're actually using our application so we can focus our tests on the areas of our application that generate the most revenue or provide the most value or just have the most use. And then lastly, you want that application manager there with that roadmap view of upcoming projects with high-level feature changes. In this regression review meeting, we're going to identify what new scripts, whether they're manual or automated, should now become part of our core regression. What existing regression scripts that we have, manual or automated, should be removed from the regression because that functionality is now deprecated or that functionality hasn't been deemed to be important enough. Getting the people together and collaborating in this fashion, you will end up generating a regression suite that is highly focused on those most valuable features. Those features that could cause trouble for our users, or those features that generate the most value for our business. What else can we do to make sure that our automation is nice and healthy? You've seen a lot of superheroes in this presentation, Avengers. Well, my favorite superhero is Martin Fowler. Martin Fowler once said, "I'm not a great programmer. I'm just a good programmer with great habits." So we're going to apply Martin Fowler's great habits to test automation in the form of code reviews as well as refactoring. Code reviews. What you should do is for every single script that you are planning to put into your master that you're going to execute on a regular basis, they should be code reviewed. What are we looking for in code reviews? That they're actually understandable by the team, that they actually represent the current state of the application, that you're not actually end up duplicating already existing effort, and that you've addressed any data or environmental needs, and that you followed the overall team standards for delivery. At my current employer, we require every single commit to be code reviewed by 2 other individuals. So this is done as part of that gate in Azure DevOps, so that we require others to participate and contribute to the overall quality of our automation. We want to we want to treat our test automation the same way we would expect our developers to take care of their development code. In refactoring sessions, these are things that should be held on a regular recurring basis, either weekly or bi-weekly, following those same principles that Martin Fowler originally published in the refactoring book more than 20 years ago, that our test automation should be maintainable, it should be extensible, and we should be able to share that domain knowledge. Imagine people coming in 5 years from now and you've long left your company and they're going to look at your automation. Do you want them to say, wow, I'm glad they put this in place. This is really easy. Or do you want them to say, whoever did this before is an absolute idiot. This doesn't work at all. You want to have it be clean for the next person, and you want to be able to uplift others. So in having refactoring sessions, what you want to do is you want to pull in all members of that team, as well as an outsider, an automation oracle from another team for that outside view. And in that session, you want to focus on, hey, how can we improve the performance of our automation? How can we make sure that it reflects the current state of the application? Are there any places where we're just duplicating work, tests doing the same thing, or trying to reinvent the wheel? These are the same sort of guiding principles that we want to follow for automation. So instead of saying, hey, you should do this, let's put a little bit of structure around it to actually implement refactoring sessions on a regular basis. You do so by assigning a team lead. So that person is responsible for scheduling the meeting, for delegating the work, for selecting what focus area, as well as providing any updates to the bug report. That outside oracle, the automation guide, is that person who's going to keep track of every single session. They're also going to keep track of those action items and who owns them. Each action item should be owned by at least a person, as well as delivering that improvement status report. This is something that can be done simply in Excel sheets to show that as we're adding in additional automation, we're maintaining the same quality levels that we expected with our automation suite, or improving as time goes on. As for the focus area, this provides those sort of guardrails around people going off on their own for refactoring sessions of, let's focus for this session on, say, a code metric report, or a given feature that we're working on for this sprint, or an overall project release, or our regression, we look at a subsection that are failing, or just a CI report that's been executed. Making this something standard and regular makes it part of what is expected rather than the exception. And it helps build up good habits for everyone on your team. Having those senior level people working side by side with the junior level people is how you turn those junior level people into senior level people. So this helps uplift other members of the team. So in summary, what did we learn today? Well, it's important for us to focus on the fastest, most robust tests. So unit tests being more important than service level more important than UI, and UI more important than end-to-end. That's not to say end-to-end tests are not valuable. They are absolutely valuable. It's just your focus area, given the time and budget that you have, should be on unit first. It's important for you to build based upon that probability of failure, what the impact is going to be on the business and the complexity. We're building and adding value. Lastly, we're always going to be constrained by budget, project deadlines, the technical skill sets of others, and we'll always limit the path forward. So you need to work within those constraints. At my current organization, at my past organization, we had those similar challenges where we came in and we had people that had never coded a line in their life. So we have to build in those training sessions for them to build up that technical skill set. So that way, eventually, those people who may already be seniors or leads themselves will have that same capability in the automation space as they do in the QA space or from the performance testing perspective. So investing in people is probably the most important thing that you can do to ensure automation success. So I have another section at the very end of this, but I always leave it at for people who want the presentation, and that's a section on metrics, because I did not warn you up front that there was going to be math. So I'm going to save the math for the people who want the presentation from Paul. So I now open it up for questions.
Hey, Thomas, that was great. And thanks so much for not getting into math without a warning. That's great. That's hilarious. This was a good presentation. I already see a few of these questions out here. So as people are typing in more, I wanted to ask you a few of those. I don't know if you're able to share your video as we talk through these. That might be helpful. But the first one is from Beth, and she says, for compliance or regulated applications, test traceability is highly desirable. Have you some suggestions on how to get there when we have many checks, tests, and a few different layers and tools involved?
Yeah, so I think this is a very important problem to address. So one that I've had to deal with. So in my prior company, my team, we supported 73 different applications, and they used multiple different systems for tracking their tests, and some used none at all. And so it needs to be built in as that upfront concern of, let's try to move towards a system, whether that is just a single project tracking tool. Like for now, my current company, we use Azure DevOps, and we're making sure that our automated tests live in the same exact place as our manual tests. One of the ways in which you can do that instead of writing things twice is a member of my team, Jaren, has written a script that will interact with the API of Azure DevOps and insert those automated test cases. So that way, everything that is in your IDE matches up one-to-one with what is in your project tracking tool. So I think it's important to have a single source of truth. The reason why all of these tests are in the project tracking tool as opposed to, say, just your automated IDE is this is something that's more accessible to everyone in the organization, as in everyone can go into the project tracking tool and see that as that single source of truth, rather than them having to install an IDE to view those tests. So that's my advice, is try to find the tool that is most accessible to your organization, put all of your tests following a given standard into that single tracking tool. Regardless of what your own personal preferences may be, it's always about what is best for the organization.
Nice, and I think that's a really good comment there at the end too. It's about what's best for the organization. That's really key. So often we can get caught up in what we want and what we think is best, but it's about what's best for the organization. That's great. And by the way, you mentioned Martin Fowler quite a few times, and I'm a big Martin Fowler fan myself. So I really liked that, and I can't wait to read his new version of the refactoring book in JavaScript. It's on my list. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh, I didn't know about that one. I know he published the Ruby version a couple of years ago with the help of a couple others. I'd be interested to see the JavaScript version.
Yeah, I think this is actually a second edition, I think, something like that.
Very cool.
Yeah, so Shawl asks, should not unit tests be done by the developer and not the test automation engineer or test automation?
Yeah, ideally, it's something that's written by the developers. And we talk about up front, like acceptance tests should also be written by the developers. But I don't live in sort of the theory world. The farther I get into automation and interacting with others, at the same level, sort of like Paul as well, that we look at, not every company is going to follow best practices that were written in books by Martin Fowler or Kent Beck. So you have to account for companies with bad practices of at least helping to ensure quality. So you can always maintain and be that champion of quality of, hey, developers should absolutely write this, and I 100% agree with you. But in practice, things fall apart, and we have to be the ones to champion that quality. And so that means covering up at certain times for the deficiencies in other parts of our organization. So it's a dirty job for us to do, but a necessary one. But just make sure that as you're taking on that job, that you always advocate for the right way to do things.
That's great. That's great. So I'm going to take one more question here. It's from Tracy, and it's kind of long, so bear with me. You suggested that automation engineers should be free to attack automation however they see fit. You also suggested teams should be able to share their automation across teams. In my experience, this means that teams may be using different languages for their automation. How would you suggest working around that conundrum, letting teams solve problems on their own in different languages versus having teams coordinate and write automated code that can be shared across teams?
Yeah. So I think we go back again to what is best for that organization. So it may be more practical for a given team to write in Java or C# or JavaScript or Ruby or Python. But overall, what is best for the organization? Well, for all the testers to collaborate, trying to come to at least as much as possible shared technology stack and standards will help ensure long-term sustainability. I'm not sure about your particular experience, but at least in my own experience, we see a lot of problems in terms of production defects at those baton handoff points between different business centers or solution segments or business segments, whatever you want to call it. And that's where you end up getting a lot of the finger pointing and blame. And teams that work in those silos end up only working out just for their given application and nothing for crossing those boundaries. So that's why my advice is find a way for people to come together across the enterprise to collaborate on common standards as much as is reasonable. So for instance, with my original team, each member of my team oversaw a given business segment that could be dozens of applications. And we all got together every single week for 2 hours to work on improvements for our architecture or standards and practices or collaboration on these end-to-end pipelines that we have to set up. We do something similar now in my current employer, where we have every Friday an architecture meeting where we try to collaborate and come to a common solution. And we work with other business segments, both in helping to train them, as well as to get access to the data and environmental needs, so that way we can actually execute those end to end. So like it's never like a black and white. It's always a spectrum of gray of try to keep the tech stack as small as possible. Try to come up with common standards. And to be clear, I'm not advocating for like just an enterprise level team that's sort of like ivory tower, like you would like an enterprise architecture, but rather good collaboration that exists between the people that are actually on the line, on the front lines delivering that work, because those are the ones that are going to feel the pain the most.
That's great. That's great. So much good information here. I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for all of this. For anyone who hasn't noticed yet, I haven't mentioned it, but in the handouts section, you can get the slides that Thomas has been using. And you can see that extra section that has all the math in it. So looking forward to that. And if you don't get it while you're on the webinar right now, we'll be happy to send it to you later, paul@beaufortfairmont.com, or reach out to us through the Beaufort Fairmont website or some other way. Thomas, once again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Paul, thank you very much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, and this also will be recorded. It is being recorded, so you'll be able to find this on the Beaufort Fairmont website. We have the beaufortfairmont.com/webinars page up there. It's got all of these webinars that we've done, over 40 over the last 3 to 4 years. Glad to have Thomas as one of the folks here on it. Next month, be aware that I'm going to be presenting, and I'm going to be talking about DevOps. So the 3 major frameworks for DevOps. Make sure to join me for that. That I believe it will be on the 16th of April. Also, make sure that you keep in touch with us, because Jana Leffler will be coming back in a couple months in May to talk more about DevOps and more about CI/CD pipelines and building them. I'm really excited about that. She did a great job last month. So I know you all are excited about the giveaway. Who's going to win the $50 Amazon gift card giveaway? Before I do that, I just want to mention again, look, I know it may sound silly or completely out of whack with what's going on right now, that, oh, Paul, people are really having a hard time with coronavirus. I understand. To mention, Paul, that be positive, that doesn't seem in sync with what's going on. I apologize if that came off the wrong way, but I do want to say there's a lot of great benefits to being positive. People can be healthier. We see that there are studies out there where people actually get well and more healthy in part because of being positive. And you never know what people are going through around you. So try to smile at somebody, try to be good to the people around you. Let's keep that going. As I've seen it so much through this so far, looking forward to seeing even more of it and seeing people continue with it. So who's going to win? That's the question. Who's going to win this Amazon gift card? And the answer is it will be Lyle H. So if your last name starts with H and your first name is Lyle, you are the winner of this $50 Amazon gift card. Once again, we want to thank so much Thomas for being here. When you have challenges with test automation or DevOps or Agile and test automation within those, I want to talk to you. When you're ready to get some help with that, we help with consulting, with training, and with people who can help you out as well. So this is my contact info. Make sure to find a time with me to sit down and talk when you're ready to have us help you out with those problems. Thank you so much again for being here, Thomas. Thanks everybody else for being here. We had over 100 people join us today. That's exciting. Keep up the good work, everybody. Keep working hard. Things are going to get better. Okay. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.